Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we'll be talking about Chapter 7D, the ordinance that was passed, how it impacts our condo associations here in Miami-Dade County. We're going to give everyone about a minute to log in. We do have over 125 participants that signed up for the webinar. So we want to give everyone an opportunity to log in as we get started. So any questions that you may have, we do have the Q&A available. So just go ahead and put your questions here. Please keep in mind that, again, the questions should be catered more towards 17D and any items that you may have towards that. But if there's anything we can address, we'll do our best to address it in this webinar. If not, at the end of the webinar, we will provide both Gary's contact information as well as mine. So you can reach out to our respective organizations so that we could provide you some kind of assistance. We do get asked many times, is this going to be posted? And yes, we will be posting this on our YouTube page. I'm sure Siegfried will share it with their group of individuals. So there will be a recording of the webinar so you could share with either other members of your association or board members as well. So I think we have a good audience already logged in. So why don't we start with some introductions? Gary, if you want to talk a little bit, say a little bit about yourself and the firm.
Thank you, Rafael. My name is Gary Mars. I'm a equity partner with Siegfried Rivera law firm. We are principally a community association law firm, offices in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach, concentrated in all practices of community association representation, condo homeowner association, mixed use master associations, co-op as well. So our practice is everything from initial interpretation, enforcement, turnover, all the way through complex commercial litigation with regard to construction defect and other turnover related issues, or contract issues regarding build outs and things of that nature, which is very common in our practice right now, as a lot of associations are embarking on large construction projects for their maintenance and improvement of their properties. So I myself have been practicing for just north of 32 years in this practice area. And along with myself, the firm is filled with a whole bunch of board certified lawyers that pretty much specialize either in construction and or community association and planned community representation. So I want to thank Affinity for putting this together. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you, Rafael.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being on, Gary. I know you and your team doing an amazing job. It's always a pleasure working with you all. So thank you for being on today. As for myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. We've been in the business now 15 years. We're more of a boutique style operation. We take all kinds of associations, but predominantly mainly on-site properties, both in the HOA and the condo sector. We don't pick up just every property. We are looking for certain key things within your community. More importantly, the partnership that you're looking to forge with us. Because if we believe if we have a strong partnership, we can get through any of the challenges that your community has. So any questions when it comes to management or any challenges that you may be having, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or my team. We'll be glad to help you in any way. We're a big proponent of education, which is why we constantly have these webinars online. So I'm going to launch our first poll to get an understanding of who we have as within our crowd. So if everyone could take a minute and just fill out the poll. And while you do that, we'll go ahead and get started with Chapter 17D, the ordinance that was passed. So Gary, I'm going to ask you, what's your understanding of how this law came about, or how was it born?
Well, as most people are aware, there's been much reaction legislatively as a result of Champlain Towers' unfortunate situation. The county, and this is again 17D is an ordinance, so everybody understands, which is uniquely a Miami-Dade County restriction. And so this particular law came out of transparency and information to be made available pretty much as a result of the effects of Champlain Towers and some of the criticism that came out after that, the information that should have been known to the public was not made available, including particularly with regard to reports and things of that nature about the condition of the building, financial information about the building, things of that nature. So because of that reality, the county reacted. To their compliment, Miami-Dade County reacted a little bit, early in the efforts compared to other municipalities, and they came up with the 17D ordinance again to provide for more information to be available and accessible. It passed in 2022, March of 2022, by the entire commission. They were all in favor of it, so it had very strong backing by the Board of County Commissioners.
Excellent. Yeah, I know, because I understand that, the state has their own database that now they're requiring, which is going to be different than what 17D is requiring, which we'll go into what 17D is going to require as we go through these questions. But it looks like the county stepped in to make it, make it a little bit more transparent for our associations, which I get it. Now we have, what recently came out in the paper of an association with embezzlement and so forth. But, it's important to have this information out there. I do believe that there was some other interests that were involved as well, try to get some information out there. But ultimately now our association are going to be required to provide this set of documents by the date that's required. And what's your belief of what the intent of the Board of County Commissioners was?
Well, listen, the main purpose of it is to create a database so that there's certain baseline information available. The county really expanded on that. And again, like you said, we'll get into the details of what that is. I'll rattle that off in a little while. But the details of the requirements. But it really is the intent of the county to create a annual registration and database update with certain baseline information that would be available to, you can call it the consumer, but the greater community on a public policy standpoint, to provide documentation pertaining to the operation and integrity of the building, the condominium, throughout Miami-Dade County. So conceptually, it's a great idea. It does raise a series of questions about what the effects will be. How do you enforce even the requirement to provide all this information? To a reader, what happens if there's not available all the information because the building may just not have all the information that's available. So there are ripple effects to having this information available. If you're a consumer and you have to have a report, all your reports on the condition of the building listed on the website, and there are not many, is that going to deter people from buying in your building or things of that nature? So I think it conceptually is putting something out there that people have the opportunity of connecting into and getting information about the status of the building and information about the building. But I think there are definitely going to be corollary effects to it that are important, may not have been really taken strongly into consideration by the legislatures, in this case, the commission. We're going to have to vet through that and see how it all works. So,
sure. And I think we should maybe give our listeners an idea of what are some of the requirements. What are the items that are going to need to be uploaded to this site, and what's the deadline to put that information up there?
So the deadline is February 1st, 2023. Apparently the registration portal, which Miami-Dade County is putting forward, is going to come online in January 1st of 2023. So they're going to start it a month early from the deadline date, which again is February 1st. So the information that is required, and I'm going to read it, it's the best way to do that because I don't have this committed to memory. But this is the information that they're going to be requiring. They're going to need the name of the association, which has to include, whatever the name is registered with the Florida Division of Corporations. The reason that's important is because there are associations that may be the 1853 Condo Association. They're known as, the Blue Sky Condominium, but in reality, their legal name is different than their what's referred to as the fictitious name.
Yeah.
So the name is going to have to be the one that's registered with the state in addition to any kind of fictitious name. So that has to be listed. The business address and the legal description of each resident owned, operated, and governed by the community association. So the business address of the association, the name and contact information of the property manager or designated agent of the association, the name and contact information for any emergency contact for the association, which has to be different than the previously referred to property manager or designated agents. There has to be an emergency contact. A list of all officers and directors of the association with contact information. Again, it's not defined what that means. I would suggest that in order to comply with other statutory restrictions, that's going to mean the mailing address of the officers and directors. A link to the community association website. So reminding everybody listening that in the state of Florida, any association with 150 or more units is required and has been required under Florida law for the past several years to maintain an independently functioning website that certain documents of the association have to regularly be updated to and maintained on. That website will be the website they're referring to, including if there's a link to a website in your smaller association, whatever that would be. But the mandate is that you have to have a website if you're 150 units or more. So the website would have to be listed. An impression of the corporate seal, so the literal corporate seal going back in the day, there should be a corporate seal. They would like to see the impression. Why they want that, I'm not really sure, but okay. A legible copy of the association's governing documents and any amendments, including the declaration, articles, bylaws, rules, and regulations. So a full set of your controlling documents. A copy of the community association's most recent set of complied, reviewed, or audited financial statements based upon your budgets. Each association has to maintain either a report or a financial statement that has to be maintained on the site. And again, it says a copy of the most recent set, so they're not asking for historical documents. They're looking for your last prepared set. Any monthly association fees and any applicable current or approved special assessments must be outlined. So again, not an easy task. That's going to take some work to put all that information out. A copy of the community association's most recently adopted budget, their annual budget. The location where all building permits for work in the common areas or elements will be posted if there is any construction going on. So you need to designate a location. Oftentimes it's the management office if it's on site. Sometimes we designate them in the, in the front window of the building or something to that effect. But you have to actually identify a specific spot so that in the event somebody does come to the property, they'll be able to identify by virtue of reviewing the outstanding permits, they'll be able to understand where and what is going on property. All reports issued within the last 10 years on the structural status of each of the properties within the county owned, operated, or governed by the community association, including any required recertification reports if applicable. So this is the real big takeaway coming out of the Champlain Towers disaster. Again, it somewhat lines up with what we have now seen come into for the statute, the Condo Act, the commonly referred to 4D legislation. But that would be the add-in of any reports. Doesn't say what kind of reports, so it doesn't indicate whether or not it's an engineer report. It could be an architectural report. Any report, it just refers to all reports issued within a 10-year time frame on the structural status of each of the properties. Again, not defined. So it's a pretty broad requirement. Those would have to be posted on the property. Getting ahead of a potential series of questions, what does structural status mean? Again, it's not clear. You will probably be best to refer back to your legal counsel. The reason I say that is because I would imagine both through the Florida legislation, meaning the state of Florida legislation, and our local legislation, the context of what structural status means will probably be defined over time. And we will see things possibly coming out, in this case, from the county, that are defining that, or it may actually be something we're going to refer to really through state legislation. But that definition is probably going to need to be formed. And so your council should be on top of that. Certainly a firm like mine is always monitoring that type of information. So they would be able to best provide you that type of information. But it's not defined as of right now. Last but not least, on the list of 14 items is a certificate of insurance listing all the association's current insurance policies, including companies, policy numbers, coverage limits, and effective dates. So those are a pretty broad list of requirements. They go beyond, and we'll probably talk about it in a couple moments, they go way beyond what the state requires us to have on the state site for purposes of submission to the state of Florida. But it's a pretty complete list. And again, just to remind everybody, February 1st is the registration deadline. The portal will be opening as, based on the county's representation on January 1st.
Excellent. So the questions have popped off here, especially after you've listed all the items. And one of the questions here, I know we've had many of our board members ask us, well, can you define, the contact information that's going to be provided? Because as a board, I definitely don't want my cell phone number, my office number, in some cases, even my house address kind of listed. So I know it's very vague the way that they put it, because basically they said contact information. What would you be, I guess, your recommendation when it comes to that information that will be listed or should be? It's
okay, so
listed,
again, yeah, all it says is the name and the contact information. That's how it's listed. It doesn't indicate much more than that. So my comment would be is, as long as you're going to be able to get in contact with the officer or director using that information that you provide, I think it satisfies that requirement. Again, taking in other legislative restrictions. So as many of the viewers may understand, providing email addresses and telephone numbers is not the obligation of any board member or director. I understand the issue with that. Statutorily under 718, we're talking about a condo association. That type of information is not required to be provided unless the board member or director, has opted in to provide that information. That said, I think that, for example, if there's a central address of the association where a director or an officer is able to be reached, the property manager's office or something like that, that should satisfy that requirement. Nowhere does it indicate in here that, the personal contact information has to be provided, as in a home address or certainly not an email or a telephone number. That is not included in here. So I would say that based upon a read of this until it gets further defined, and that may change, but based upon what's currently out there right now, it would probably be able to be satisfied by providing, the central address of the association, assuming there is one, where, information will be received by by and on behalf of the directors and officers.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly a recommendation we made to our boards, because as you stated, Gary, which is an important point for board members to keep in mind, is the statute does say, it's confidential, the board members or residents' emails and telephone numbers. I do have a question here from Carlos. Carlos asked, the 17D apply to all condos or only 150 units and above?
No. So yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I don't want to confuse anybody. What I was saying applies to all condos. All condos. There's no restrictions based on it. The 150 is only regarding the website. And the point I was trying to make is, I just want to be very clear on that one issue, is that a website by Florida statute 718, by the condo statute, a website is only obligated to be maintained for associations that have 150 or more units. If you have a website and you're less than that, you need to provide that information. If you don't have a website, you don't have to provide that information. But legally, the only associations that are required to maintain a website would be those that have 150 or more units.
Correct. Thank you.
All of this other data applies to every condo association in Miami-Dade County.
Correct. And that's an important point, because many people feel that, they're kind of mixing what's going on with SB4D, that, it has to be 1-story, 3. This actually applies, as Gary mentioned, to all condos. Tony, you had a question if these are for HOAs. Right now, the ordinance is just for condominium associations. And Gary, I want to ask, who's responsible for turning in this information? Is it for self-managed communities, the board, or is there any regulation or anything that states that it has to be someone in particular that needs to turn that information in?
So it's a great question because it's a very practical question. Lawyers aren't usually asked practical questions, but I think I could handle this one pretty easily. So look, the answer is it's not clear. It doesn't say who's the obligated party. The association would assumably designate their property manager. Again, I'm not trying to put that burden on any property manager or management company, but I think that would be the proper person who should, who probably maintains all this information would be the proper person to disclose this information. And I'm certain that for property management companies like Affinity, you probably will take on that obligation. It even will become part of your, your scope of your services that you're going to be providing, because this will have to be done annually. So this is not something that's just done February 1st, 2023. It will be done every February 1st in future years with updated information. If there is not a property manager, for some reason, you don't have that type of designation, it's going to be incumbent upon the board of directors ultimately, as everything is, to ensure that you're satisfying these requirements. So one or the other would probably, is certainly going to work. It just needs to be performed. And it's supposed to be performed within the timeframes that they've designated.
Excellent. I have a great question here from Jose, and Jose asks, does this apply to co-ops or is it only condo associations?
Yeah, so again, co-ops are 719 association, condos are 718. There's a very different legal differentiation between the two. And this legislation right now is in regard to condominiums only. This is the only referenced association. Doesn't mean that we won't see changes to that, but co-op is a little even different than a homeowners association. Again, the idea, I think, principally going back to your opening question, Raphael, is why is this being mandated? And it's really to provide a database with regard to we'll call it the structural integrity or the structural soundness of your building, what's being done by the associations in order to maintain the building's integrity. That was really, I think, the main basis. So when you're dealing with a homeowner association, homeowner associations typically don't have, buildings that are beyond low-rise buildings. If they have a large clubhouse or something, usually they're not beyond a 2-story building, unless you're dealing with a master type association. That may change a little bit, but we're not typically talking about high-rise 720 associations. With regard to 719 co-ops, again, there are many co-ops that are multi-story. I would think the county would want this type of application to apply to them, but it is not designated as such at this point. So it's only condo associations.
Excellent. And are there any fees associated with the county having to maintain this database, and any penalties if an association doesn't upload it in time?
Yeah. So the way the county set this up is they did create a tiered rate structure for the implementation of this database. And it's going to vary based upon the size of your association. So for example, they're instituting a $50 registration fee for all associations within 25 units or less. And then there's an additional $1.50 fee per unit above 25 units. So there's a baseline of 25 units, which is very small, but we understand there's a lot of small associations, small, condos. That would be a $50 registration fee. Then you have to add $1.50 for every unit on top of that. So again, it's not going to be a horrendously expensive experience, but as you get into, buildings that have 600-700 units, which there are certainly a bunch of those in the Dade County market, that dollar amount is going to obviously creep above, $1,000 or, probably between $1,000 and $2,000 for very large associations. But that's how you base that. So again, your first 25 or $50, everyone above that is going to be $1.50 per unit.
And my understanding of it is that there is a penalty as well if it's not turned in time. Is it $200? I believe it was going to be the penalty.
You know what? I am not 100% sure of. I'm sorry to tell you that I don't know.
This is where for me it's it's a bit. I mean, it's past, right? There's nothing that we can do now. But this is where I believe there's other interest involved in certain information, and there's some questions here that have to do with what happens if an association has these structural issues and an insurance company now doesn't want to bind them. Well, ultimately, you need it to be transparent one way or the other. This information should be public, whether you have a website or not, because ultimately you want to communicate with your residents, letting them know what's the situation of your association. If you sit on a board, you have fiduciary responsibility to the membership of what's going on. So it's important. I'm a big believer in communicating these items and being transparent. I just think they could have been handled a little bit differently, especially for the larger associations. You already have the condo fees that you pay. Now you're going to have, the way I see it, is kind of another tax to manage this. And ultimately, there could have been so many different ways that this information could have been handled, or the request of the information. Most likely for boards also, it is going to fall on management for those of you that have management companies. And depending on your structure, from on-sites, we have an on-site team that's going to assist in that process. But for portfolio accounts, there probably is going to be a fee from the management company as well to be providing this information, because we do have to gather it and upload it. Someone asked here, an anonymous person asked if there's special technology that's needed. The site that I'm aware of isn't up yet, but I'm assuming it's just going to be uploading the necessary information and filling out the forms. The state already came out with their link, which we'll go over what their requirements are. Pretty simple to fill out, pretty simple to upload the information. So I'm assuming the county site is going to be similar. Now that all this information is out to the public, because it's my understanding that it's going to be out to the public, I wanted to confirm with you, Gary, is this database, I'm assuming it's going to be accessible to everyone. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, there's no restrictions on accessibility, so it's going to be available. And the idea, with a lot of legislation, the context is, the inception and the thinking is all excellent. The problem here is, will it be misused? I mean, there's so many different pieces of legislation. We know that the intentions are terrific, but the question then becomes, how will it be applied over time? And that's a big issue, and one that we don't know the answer to, but there's certainly, will be and probably are going to be, we'll call it misuse or abuses or indirect uses of this information. It's going to be out there. It's going to be out there regardless, because obviously, again, you refer to the recent legislation that changed statewide for condominiums or buildings that are 3 stories or more. In that regard, for the state legislation, there's a lot of information and data that's going to be made available as well as a result of that legislation. So again, to remind you, as I started earlier, the county started a little earlier on this than the state legislation. So this was their dive into trying to figure out how to best address what was a horrible situation involving Surfside. And this was their best effort to do it. Is it the right effort? That we don't know. And again, I don't want to get off, because there may be another question you're going to ask, but I think it's fine to say it. Another very big significant issue with this, which I don't know if there's been any questions on this yet, is how will this be enforced? Is another big issue, because the county does not have resources to dedicate, as far as I know, which will be pretty significant, because there's thousands of condominiums, thousands in just Miami-Dade County alone. So, to have somebody actually confirm that the material is in whatever that material is, and I'm not suggesting that anybody should not fully comply, but I'm saying, the context of even just knowing that of all the condominiums listed by registration with the state of Florida, that there's been some data received, that probably is going to be a full-time job in itself. I know this, the county has indicated that they have no intention of actually evaluating the material that's been submitted to ensure that there's any type of satisfaction of the compliance requirements, they're not going to have the resources to do that. So that raises another issue about, yeah, I submit materials come February 1st, but what happens if they're incomplete? And, what is the monitoring element of it, an enforcement element of it? That is unknown, and it has already been raised as a concern that the county registers. And just to add, that's a period. And the next line is, there's also a very, very significant burden because the state requirements, which again, we're not talking about today, which involve, another line of reporting, milestone reporting that's going to be required. That all starts up come, 2024. At the end of 2024, things are going to have to be submitted and work is going to have to be done by December 31st, 2024. Much of the burden of oversight of that information is going to also be borne on your county or local municipalities, whoever the governing entity is. So there's, as a result of the terribly unfortunate situation of Surfside, the legislation that's come out is all going to be required to be enforced by your local municipalities, including this 17D. So how there will be resources to be able to do that is an unknown factor.
Yeah, when I read that, I was, I understand where it's coming from. I mean, with the amount of associations that we have here, just in Miami-Dade County alone, that would be a serious undertaking to have to confirm all the information that's being provided with each association. And again, and Gary, you've emphasized it a couple times, and I agree with you. After the tragedy, what we want is much more transparency, and the residents to know what the situation is within these associations. And our legislators did their part, at least to try to understand. But once it's when you're implementing these laws, that's why there's so many changes to the laws. You start to realize where the gaps are. And I do have a concern for many associations that all this information is going to be just out to the general public rather than to the people that it should be to, which are the members of the association. I have a question here from Liran, and he asked, what happens if the insurance carriers review this information that's out there now to the public and they deny coverage to your association?
Well, listen, it goes back because I think you asked a similar, one of the other viewers asked a similar question. Look, I don't want to get away from the reality. The reality is that these are just reporting requirements. The more fundamental issue is clearly to ensure that the association is maintaining the property as required. You don't need a milestone inspection, which is going to be for the state requirement, either going to be at 25 years or 30 years based upon your location to the ocean. That changes the definition of whether you need a 25-year inspection or 30, or you're coming up to your county 40-year inspection or 50-year inspection, whatever it is. The point being is that if your building should be, and I know I'm speaking very in a perfect world, but your building should be regularly evaluated. Conditions that exist on the property need to be maintained, repaired, replaced if necessary. Your budget should accommodate that. Obviously, you're now going to be required under, again, not 17D Miami-Dade County, but the statewide legislation. You're going to now, for condominiums, that are 3 stories or more, you're going to have to maintain a certain level of reserve, whether you have in the past or not. It's going to be mandated on you starting January 2025. World as we know it's going to change, but the most fundamental issue is, and what the biggest problem, and I'm only editorializing, but it's my strong opinion of the Champlain Tower situation, was that the board of directors knew about conditions and the unit owners were made aware to a degree, but actually putting action plans in place to deal with the conditions was what one of the main problems was at Champlain, and it happens at other associations. We spend an awful lot of time planning and thinking and figuring it out, and oftentimes get stuck on the money issue. But the main concern is to put a plan in action that's going to work for you all to address your structural components of your building, predominantly structural components, and other things that come up through, again, now it's going to be defined by Florida statute. It is defined by Florida statute, and things you're now going to be looking at to have to repair and replace. So going back to the root question, what happens if an insurance company or your insurance company reviews this data and has a negative impact on you? It's a reality that may be happening now. Probably a effective insurance carrier and agent, because I know there are a lot of them out there, is ahead of this stuff already anyway. They know when there's problems with the building. There's still reporting requirements to insurance. That happens for the most part annually. I mean, I'm sure, Raphael, you could do a whole lecture on just that, how to deal with your annual insurance renewals and things of that nature. But, it may have a negative effect. If you have a report out there and you're a 35-year-old building and you have a report that's suggesting that you have some structural issues with your building, and there's no plan or special assessment or contracts, or there's nothing going on, I mean, it could raise an issue, certainly with regard to your insurance carrier.
Correct. Yeah. And to emphasize what Gary is saying, ultimately, if you're aware of it, you definitely should have a plan, because ultimately, again, with the tragedy that occurred at Surfside, and you have a fiduciary responsibility if you do sit on a board to do what's right for the community. So if the community has some structural challenges, you need to be putting a plan together, getting direction, having an engineer going through that actual process itself. So for me, putting the information out there is very important. I believe maybe the question was more her concern of the information being out there, because I have two questions here that they state. One person anonymous states, how about if I feel it's going to be a disadvantage to my building if the information's out there, I'll pay whatever the fee is. Again, I personally do not believe, it's my opinion, that is definitely not the right approach, because the approach here is to have much more transparency. So it should be communicated to your residents. The last thing you want is a red flag for your building. We don't know what they're going to do with it. They say there isn't much that they're going to do with it, but the information is out there. So it's important for the board members that are on the call, and managers, I should say, that if you have challenges within your buildings, that you're taking the necessary steps to correct those challenges. So Gary, I kind of want to, yeah, sure.
Just want to add, it may have a negative effect on you also. I mean, if the county is requiring this data to be on a website and you are not putting the information out, and somebody does go to your building, it very well may have a red flag effect where, why is this condo not disclosing this information, or not really clear on their information that they're disclosing, or incomplete? Do I want, if you're talking about, a purchaser or a tenant, do I want to live in a building where they don't have, the baseline information available? I mean, I could see that having a negative effect on the marketability of a unit. If I'm aware that the site is supposed to have a certain baseline of information and your association doesn't have that information, I think that could have a negative effect on your. So I get the point of the person writing the question, but I think you need to really think through that, because ultimately that may backfire on you.
Yeah, that's correct. And also, lenders have gotten much smarter after what occurred. I mean, we have a ton of questionnaires. Well, that's a whole nother topic of what's being required for us to answer, which you should be talking to legal if you're answering these questionnaires, just as a side note. But ultimately, for marketability, you're going to have the challenge if you're not correcting the issues anyway. Again, the having the information out there, it is important. I don't believe neither Gary and I would say that it's not. So Gary, why don't we touch up a little bit? Maybe, I don't know if you have with you the points that the state from the DBPR, what they're requiring. I believe it's much less. I'm going to see if I could share the link on the chat for our listeners, and maybe you can touch on those points.
Sure. So again, just so you understand, and what Raphael's referring to, the state is now going to require, as of January 1st, 2023, that certain baseline data be provided to the state through their portal, which again, Raphael's going to try to pull that up. But just so everybody understands that it is a much smaller set of requirements off of the state. So the state's going to require contact name, phone number, and email address, somebody, that doesn't say it has to be a board member or an officer. It just needs to have, each association has to have a person to contact, which again probably will be the manager, the name of the condominium, the project license to find, a license. There's a way to do that, but there's a licensing number that each association has. The number of buildings on the condominium property that has more than 3 stories or more in height. Again, I'm reminding everybody from the state, only the state, not the county. And the state restrictions, it applies to buildings that are 3 stories or higher. So that, and I have associations, for example, I represent, that may have a 6-story building, and then the rest of the property are 2-story townhouses. So there could be a mix and match on that. That's why they're indicating that they need to have the number of buildings that are more than 3 stories or more in height, because it may not all be uniform. Obviously, if you have one large 30-story tower, that's what you have to disclose. The total number of units in all buildings, in all of those buildings, meaning the 3-story or more buildings, the address of those buildings, and the counties in which those buildings are located, i.e. Miami-Dade, Broward, whatever the case might be. That's all that the state is currently requiring to be disclosed. Yes, that's the state requirement. Again, it's a much more, using the kind of lawyer term, it's a much more robust requirement in the county. There's a much more defining list for the county that needs to be complied with. Again, dates February 1st, 2023, as compared to the state has that much smaller list that I just went over, which is January 1st, 2023.
Yeah, and I went ahead and included the link in the chat, so you can see what the requirements are that Gary mentioned. But you do keep in mind that's from the state. That's not what we were discussing on 17D that I'm aware of yet. We don't have access to the link. I know it's been asked a couple times regarding Chapter 17D's ordinance. Once we do have that, we'll go ahead and share that. But at the moment, we aren't aware of that the site is up from a county side.
Right,
so
which again,
I have one last question.
January 1st.
Yes, go ahead.
That's what they indicated. It would be January 1st.
Yes.
Sorry.
No worries. So I have one last question here before we wrap up, and it's a pretty good question for Lyron. And he basically asked, wouldn't the new ordinance cause unit owners to shy away from joining the board if the association's providing the board members for each year plus the engineering records? Wouldn't they be liable or exposed for, let's say, a repair that was done in 2000 earlier? Since the engineering reports are there, it's stating who the board member was, and then they could be personally sued. So the way I kind of see it is ultimately this information is public anyway, except for kind of what they're requesting, except for the engineering report, because on the state's website, it always keeps record of who's the board member during what period of time, assuming that that's updated the way it needs to be updated. Ultimately, as a board, I don't believe, me personally, my opinion would be, I don't believe that this puts more liability on the board. In reality, there's more transparency that's being provided since it's going to be on a public site. Ultimately, if you're a board or if you're considering looking to run for a board and you have challenges within your building, then you just need to start addressing those challenges and taking the necessary steps. Again, board members do fall under the business judgment rule. So if you're made aware of a structural crack, or you're aware of a crack that a manager gives you notice of, or someone does, and you've hired an engineer, the engineer, that professional is giving you recommendations, then, you would have those conversations with the engineer. They're the professionals, they're the PE, and you would be doing the right thing for the association at that moment. Now, there are different situations, but ultimately, in my personal opinion, I'm sure Gary could chime in, if you're taking the necessary steps to remediate whatever challenges are within your association, or maintaining the equipment, maintaining the structure, maintaining the building to the best of your knowledge, working with the right professionals, I don't see how providing this information will bring more liability to a board. That's my opinion, and obviously I'm not an attorney.
I would agree, and I am an attorney, but I would agree that this requirement itself isn't going to bring liability to the board. Or to a director or an officer. What I do think it does, though, is it may bring more exposure to the condominium association as an association. So look, I would just, as a friendly comment, any board member or director or even committee member joining a board of directors, first thing they should be asking is, I'd like to see a copy of our directors and officers insurance, just to make sure that I have complete coverage for my actions in the event there's some mistake made or something to that effect. I want to make sure that we have ample and proper insurance. That should be everybody's first question whenever joining any kind of board of this type. Assuming that exists, this type of disclosure is not really at issue. I think it does bring into question more, what is the association doing, and is this association functioning at the proper levels and things of that nature, doing some of the things that Raphael just indicated. Look, my view on all of this right now is, and I'm speaking as a lawyer that does this all day long and represents a lot of different sizes, shapes, and smells of associations. If I'm sitting on a board of directors, knowing this is happening, 17D, knowing that the Condo Act is modified, and more importantly, knowing what, not that God forbid I think we'll ever see, hopefully ever another type like a Champlain, which was a very unique, special circumstance with many different factors that played into it. But I know there are a lot of buildings that are aging in town. They don't have to be waterside. I go east, west, north, south. I'm a Miami guy. I know this county pretty well. There's a lot of older condos all over the place. They could be 3 stories in Hialeah, or 4-story buildings in South Miami. It doesn't really matter, or Aventura or whatever. The point being is that I think you need to have a certain action plan on this. Work with your team. This is a team effect. This is not, even if you're a board member who has so much experience as a developer or a builder or whatever, I'm just saying, or in insurance or as a contractor, it doesn't really matter. Take your experiences and use them to the association's best interest, but it's a team approach. It needs to be predominantly your board, your lawyer, your manager, and I would argue that you need to bring in some sort of construction, whether it's an engineer or architect, to your discussions soon. And you should have and factored into that will also have to be an engineer or an architect who's going to assist you in your budgeting process for these types of projects if you have to address them. So I would be sitting in the next few months so that you're ahead of this. Again, not from a reporting standpoint. That part is going to be a bit of a challenge, but we'll get through that. It's more about the implementation. What does all this mean? So I think you need an action plan. And that would be my strong advice to anybody. I'm not representing anybody through this discussion, but it would be my strong recommendation as a friendly recommendation that an action plan using the benefits of your professionals is exactly what each association should have. I don't care what size of the association it is. Everybody should have one, and you should be planning for the future.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially that partnership, Gary, because if you're an association that has some challenges, let's say in your engineering report, and you're taking the necessary steps, then call your attorney and say, look, we're going to put this information out there. Should we put what not to hide the information, but hey, you want to consult with the attorney? How do we put this? Do we put the plan with it so that the residents know that this is what's going on and it doesn't put us at a disadvantage? So again, just having
and I'm going to take a bold step, and I'm not trying to be too in any way aggressive on this, but I'm actually trying to be helpful to say there are some very good lawyers out there that know how to navigate this. And a lot of this stuff is new. So it would have to be those types of lawyers that really are dealing with this on a pretty regular basis. There are also a lot of lawyers out there who have absolutely no idea how to deal with these types of issues. If you're not, and the same I would say with management companies and certainly engineers, just because you're a PE, just because you're a professional engineer does not mean you have the wherewithal to be able to address the issues that a condominium association of your type has. So, and I would say the same also with the CPA. There's great CPA firms out there, financial, services that are provided. You need somebody on that team that knows what they're doing, or else you are wasting your association resources. So find the right law firm, find the right manager if you don't have them. If you have them, wonderful. But make sure your team is the type of team that knows what they're talking about. Not that they're, they haven't handled this type of thing and they're going to first start on your nickel. They're going to start evaluating the situation and, for the first time looking into the things that we've been talking about through the course of this discussion.
Great, excellent. Well, it looks like we touched up on all the questions. I'm going to go ahead and put up both Gary and my email. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either of our firms, and we'll put you in contact with the right individual that can provide you the necessary guidance. So Gary, I don't know if you have any closing remarks as we wrap this webinar up.
Yeah, I would just say on this 17D, I would, don't overthink it too much. I would just try to get the data out that they're looking for on a timely basis, and try to make sure it's as complete as possible. Again, I would emphasize much more than this is just a reporting requirement. It's much more important to be looking more at the fundamentals of what's going on your property and how we're looking forward to address them. They're going to come back at you under Florida statute, under the new changes. They're going to come back at you with a cutoff date of December 31st, 2024 to do your new milestone reporting and your structural integrity reserve analysis, both of which have to be completed and ready to go by the end of 2024. So that's going to require some effort. And again, that all deals with buildings 3 stories or more in height. So I would get through the reporting requirement, both the county 17D and the state, which we talked about as well. And let's move on and start having the really important conversations about how we're going to make sure our buildings are safe and secure.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much, Gary. It's always a pleasure to have you on. It's an honor to have this webinar with you. I know our firms have worked very well together over the 15 years. For all the board members, managers that attended, 50% of you actually weren't aware of this ordinance. So I want to applaud you all for attending today, for taking the time to get a little bit of additional education on how to either better manage your community or better manage your residents, and have a better understanding of how this ordinance is going to impact your association. On behalf of Affinity Management and Siegfried, again, we want to thank you all. We will be posting this webinar up on our YouTube page, and I'm sure Siegfried will share it as well. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Have a great one, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, Raphael. Good to see you all. Take care.
Bye-bye.